This episode of IGN Conversations is brought to you by Gran Turismo 6, available December 6th.
Hey everybody, Jim and Eric here to talk about some very big Marvel Sony news today. We're not only getting a Venom movie, as has been long in development, but we're also getting a movie of the Sinister Six.
Yeah.
Some of Spidey's biggest villains all teamed up together as sort of the evil Avengers, even though we're muddying the waters there a little bit. But let's start off with Venom, because we've known for a while now they've been trying to do a Venom movie. A lot of different people have been attached to it. I think Gary Ross was at one point. Now it's finally happening with Alex Kurtzman, one of the co-writers of Spider-Man 2. And he's going to be directing it as well. And then there's
Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Amazing Spider-Man 2. But there's also what Sony is calling a brain trust now of people kind of helping to develop these films, starting not only in the Amazing Spider-Man sequels, but now into their own stuff. So we're going to have Alex Kurtzman, his writing partner, Roberto Orci. You guys know them from Star Trek and a bunch of stuff. And then Ed Solomon, who did Men in Black and the first X-Men. And then Drew Goddard.
And the Bill and Ted movies.
And the Bill and Ted movie. And then Drew Goddard, who did Cabin in the Woods, and then is also doing some stuff that you're going to be covering.
Right.
The Daredevil, Netflix, Marvel stuff.
Yeah.
First off then, so Venom, thoughts on Alex Kurtzman doing this and just it happening, period?
I mean, yeah, this is the one that isn't shocking in that if you're going to expand the Spider-Man universe, Venom is kind of a no-brainer, very popular character. He's had his own spin-off comic books. But now we know that it's going to definitely spin off of this Amazing Spider-Man series. I guess the big question is which Venom?
Right.
Because there's been 3 at least, if I'm remembering correctly. Maybe I'm forgetting a couple, but there's been Eddie Brock, Mac Gargan, and Flash Thompson. I think you can take Mac Gargan out of the equation, but do you do the Eddie Brock villainous Venom, pretty much a villain, or the recent Venom, Flash Thompson, who's pretty much this government agent? He's, he is got some conflicts within him, and this, the symbiote doing stuff to him.
Yeah.
But those are 2 very different directions to go, so I think that's the big question.
And we did see in the Amazing Spider-Man 2 trailer, which we did a rewind on, there is a mention of Venom at Oscorp's stuff, Oscorp. But, all right, so Venom, it would seem, both of these now, 2 feature films based around villains.
Yeah. Maybe. It depends on which Venom they do. And again, Flash Thompson was in Amazing Spider-Man. I think he's in Amazing Spider-Man 2, played by Chris Zilka. So it's like, is this like, did things just work out great for Chris Zilka? We don't know, because we don't know which Venom, or would they try to do both in one movie?
I have a feeling it's going to be Eddie Brock, and they'll cast a bigger actor for that. We have yet to even see Daily Bugle in the new Amazing Spidey movies, so it's not like they'd have to recast somebody there. I mean, it's completely divorced, obviously, from Topher Grace's incarnation. So let's talk about Sinister Six now.
Yeah.
So Sinister Six, as you can see here,
some of them,
they were one of the original really supervillain teams in comics. It goes back to the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko era. How do you think that's going to work now in a feature film, having not just a couple of villains, but now we have 6 main villains in a team? It's pretty unprecedented.
It really is, and it's like you kind of think like Sony is not going to base a movie around 6 villains just doing horrible things for 2 hours.
Wouldn't that be something, though?
Right.
The anti-Avengers.
But one thing I will say is I've got actually Green Goblin's there now. Green Goblin proper was never part of the Sinister Six. But I will say this: I'm very curious if they might take something from Marvel, which is the Thunderbolts concept. Which Thunderbolts in Marvel has been this. There's been several incarnations, but it's always a team of supervillains who have now become superheroes. But whether or not they've all really what they're really up to has always been kind of murky, and sometimes it's like a couple of them are really trying to turn over a new leaf, while others have an agenda of using their guise as heroes to do more bad stuff.
Right.
And a couple years ago, there was a version of Thunderbolts led by Norman Osborn in the comic books. Now Sony doesn't have rights to almost any of the other characters who've been members of Thunderbolts, but they've got Norman Osborn, and they've got all the Spider-Man villains with Sinister Six. So I wonder if it might be kind of an amalgam of that idea of Norman Osborn presenting to the world all these men who have, they've turned over a new leaf. and now they're going to work to help the greater good, but really he's Norman Osborn and he has a horrible agenda for what he's going to do with them.
That would actually probably be the wisest approach. I just wonder, though, can we... A lot of these characters might not be introduced until that film.
Yeah.
Are we going to see Jamie Foxx back then? Is he going to be the anchor now of this film, of other
Right.
Spider-Man sequels? We don't know.
We don't know if any of the other villains. We don't know what the lineup is exactly. And like in the comic book, Sinister Six have had a few lineups. Plus, we don't know a release date, and that's an important question because. Let's assume right now this is going to come out after Amazing Spider-Man 3, which means they can use Amazing Spider-Man 3 to introduce more villains. We all thought they were aiming towards Sinister Six anyway.
Right.
In the Amazing Spider-Man series. They still could, but it's like, okay, here, now let's meet Dr. Octopus, let's meet the Vulture, and have them all, or maybe 5 of them, by the time you go into the Sinister Six movie.
What does this mean, then, for Spider-Man himself and sort of the future of that franchise? I mean, clearly they want to go beyond just a third film. They've already, and I talked about a 4th one, but Andrew Garfield's been a little coy about coming back for that. Maybe he knew that it's going to get really villain-centric, and maybe he feels like, what is in it for Spider-Man now if he's not going to pop up in these movies?
And I do also...
Although we don't know.
We don't know. And I also wonder, when they put out a release date up through Amazing Spider-Man 4 a few months ago, that seemed awfully ballsy. But now I wonder if that's a placeholder for one of these movies.
It's possible. It's possible. I mean, they'd have to either cast another new Spider-Man or maybe Garfield just wants himself a nice hefty payday for coming back for a 4th one.
Meanwhile, though, we also have a big possibility here, given that these are 2 movies centered around villains or characters that at least began as villains in Spider-Man, to have Spider-Man show up but never take his mask off. So it's very... Right. You could really think that Andrew Garfield could do a day in a voice recording booth. Because all you would need is Spider-Man fighting them. It's not his point of view. We're not going to go home with him.
It can just be a digital. It's like what they're doing with Iron Man largely in a lot of the films now, It
could be a guy, and a guy could be wearing the costume. It just doesn't have to be Garfield,
Right.
And I could really see that being a possibility because then you can have Spider-Man at the top of the movie maybe or something like that. Has a small presence to know that, yes, this is part of the same world and they've encountered him, but it doesn't mean Andrew Garfield doesn't ever have to come on set,
But they would need some sort of human character there outside of the villains.
Right.
Could we be seeing maybe the Daily Bugle pop up as sort of a through line?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that we still haven't heard anything about the Bugle, anything about Jonah being cast.
Yeah.
And it's such a major part of the story. And especially
they at least have a Tumblr.
They do have a Tumblr. But with Eddie Brock and, the photographer or reporter, however you want to say, his varied backgrounds, there certainly is an opportunity to, although there's also been versions of Eddie Brock that had nothing to do with the reporter side. So but it is true, you need that human element. And like, we were saying, even with Sinister Six, Venom, even with Eddie Brock, has always been kind of conflicted. But Sinister Six, they're not going to want it to be 6 horrible people. So I think there will be that element of someone who... is conflicted. And who knows, it could be Electro. We don't know because it sounds like he's going to be introduced as kind of this nerdy, Spider-Man fan, and maybe he's trying to redeem himself. But there's got to be something there because, again, it can't just be like, we're evil, and that's the whole movie,
But wouldn't that be something?
It would be
if they
something.
did try to do that. All right, well, you know what? We're going to be following these movies now for the next several years. It was
Never stops.
Quite a surprise here.
Yeah.
Sony trying to go for their own expanded sort of Marvel universe. So you folks who want Marvel to just get Spider-Man back, it's not happening.
That's not happening.
Never. All right, so keep it locked here to IGN for more on Venom, Sinister Six, the Amazing Spider-Man movies, and more. Thanks for watching.
Thanks.